Hello my fellow animal lovers and history buffs. In today's episode we're heading to Georgian England for a bizarre tale involving rabbits, royal doctors, public humiliation and one of the strangest medical scandals of the 18th century. This is the story of Mary Toft and the rabbit birth hoax. Now before we go any further, this is your trigger warning because this episode includes references to pregnancy loss, medical procedures, animal death and historical mistreatment of both women and animals. Mary Toft was a poor woman from Godalming in Surrey here in the UK, and she was married to Joshua, who was a cloth worker. The couple were living during a period of time when class could decide whether you were believed, dismissed, examined or mocked or paraded as evidence. Now, although medicine at the time was changing, older beliefs still remained, sitting uncomfortably close to observation, anatomy and public display. Earlier that year, Mary had reportedly had a miscarriage, and soon after, she started to claim something extraordinary was happening. She appeared to be delivering animal parts, then rabbits, or more accurately, pieces of rabbits.
Congratulations, it's a rabbit.
It's my baby.
The local surgeon, John Howard, soon became involved and he examined Mary and believed he was witnessing something remarkable. Over the next month, Howard recorded that Mary had produced, amongst other things, a rabbit's head, the legs of a cat, and in a single day, 9 dead baby rabbits. Howard wrote to some of England's leading doctors and scientists, as well as the King's Secretary, informing them of Mary's apparent miraculous births. Before long, the case drew in medical men of status and court connections. King George I sent 2 men to investigate, Nathaniel St Andre, who was a surgeon and anatomist to the royal household, as well as Samuel Molyneux, who was secretary to the Prince of Wales. St Andre took the case seriously enough to publish an account called A Short Narrative of an Extraordinary Delivery of Rabbits. Once men from the royal household became involved, Mary's story changed. It was no longer local gossip from Godalming. It had travelled upwards. People with education and status and access to the king were now taking it seriously. And Mary and the rabbits were now a medical case, a public spectacle, and at the centre of a debate as to what people would believe. St Andre's belief about Mary's birth drew upon an old medical idea known as maternal impression. This was the belief that a pregnant woman's thoughts, cravings or fears and experiences could physically shape the developing baby, which, if true, means my son had a really lucky escape from being born as a bag of chips. St Andre suggested that Mary's interest in rabbits, watching them in the field, somehow manifested in her body. And that tells us a great deal about 18th century medicine and rather less about rabbits. Grice was another surgeon sent by King George I, who examined the remains of the rabbits and questioned what was being reported. He found that some of the remains contained material in their intestines, and that suggested the rabbits had eaten. That meant those rabbits had been alive and they had lived outside Mary's body. They couldn't have been miraculously gestated by her. So it seemed this was a case of fraud. Sir Richard Manningham was another respected London doctor and man midwife. He was also brought in to look at Mary, and after observing her, he believed she had delivered something more like a hog's bladder, and he was unconvinced by these miraculous births. But according to later accounts, he was persuaded by Howard and St Andre to keep his doubts quiet until there was firmer proof of fraud. By this stage, the case was no longer only about Mary. It was also about the reputations of the men who'd put their names and opinions, as well as professional confidence behind it. Mary was eventually taken to London so she could be watched more closely, and once she was under supervision, the story began to fall apart. The rabbits that had appeared so dramatically in Godalming became much harder to produce, with reports soon emerging that rabbits were being bought and brought brought into the household, and Mary's sister-in-law began to be drawn into the scandal. The doctors who'd supported the case were now struggling to explain how they'd come so close to believing it. Eventually, Mary confessed that the rabbit births had been staged, but why she did it was harder to pin down. Perhaps money played a part, along with attention or desperation, pressure from those around her, or even the strange status that can come with being treated as a sort of medical curiosity. We know Mary was poor and had reportedly experienced pregnancy loss and was living in a world where a woman's body could be examined and judged and discussed by men with far greater power than she had. So although Mary's case was a hoax, she wasn't simply a fraudster. She was a poor woman in a desperately unequal society who'd become caught up inside a scandal that had quickly become bigger than her. And of course the rabbits were victims of that hoax as well, because they were bought, handled and used as grim evidence in a human drama that involved authority, poverty, belief and reputation. The scandal quickly travelled, and there were pamphlets, songs and prints made about the rabbit birth hoax. Even William Hogarth mocked the doctors who were fooled in his satirical etching and engraving Caniculari. And in case anyone was in doubt of their reproductive anatomy, Mary's rabbit birth was only ever going to be a hoax, because humans can't produce rabbit babies, only human ones. Almost 300 years later, the rabbit birth hoax still tells us something about people. We humans love a bit of scandal, we're drawn to strange bodies and a whiff of the impossible, and still find it very hard to look away. So that's it for today's episode of Animals in History. If you've enjoyed this strange but true tale, give it a like and subscribe, and join me next time for more stories where animals, humans and history collide. Bye for now.